Collins & Co.'s not-for-profit conference, Be Empowered Through Knowledge, is designed specifically for the not-for-profit sector. Our speakers are experts in this sector, and their practical approach provides not-for-profit board members and management with the opportunity to improve their skills and knowledge across a range of specialist topics. The conference also provides a great networking opportunity.
Hello again. If you were here earlier in the morning, you would have listened to me talk. I'm back once more, so hopefully that's okay. I was a bit nervous because the room was big. The room was a bit full this morning. Then I thought maybe no one would come this afternoon. So I was slightly nervous, but also a little bit happy because maybe I could have just snuck off early. Just joking. So just in case you weren't here earlier, I just want to mention that I've been a little bit unwell with vertigo, so I'm going a little bit slow today, slower than my normal pace, and I'm sort of holding on to things a little bit as well, just to make sure I don't fall over. So please bear with me while I get through this session. As Fab said, this afternoon what we're talking about are some key tools for success in your small charities. So we're going to talk about 5 different things. It's a bit content heavy because I'll go into a bit of detail about those different tools and how you can use them. But I've got some resources that I can potentially share with you through access to different things on my website that I can talk about as we go as well. And there'll be time for questions at the end too. So what we're going to look at in the presentation today are 5 key tools. The first one is a case for support. So this really looks at who we are as an organisation and what we do. The second one is the fundraising strategy. So that's all about what are we actually going to do and how we're going to get our money in the door. The third one is called the constituency model, and this talks about this looks to answering the question, who are our people? The fourth one is then around a stewardship plan. So this is how do we engage those people and keep them engaged with our organisation? And the fifth one is your donor database, and that's about how will we manage and track our people. Okay, first up, what is a case for support? So a case for support is a document that's really at the centre of your fundraising work. It's a messaging strategy for your organisation so that all of the materials that you send external to your organisation are actually all coming from the same place. Many times I've worked with organisations, especially smaller ones, who are often not so centralised in who does all their writing. So you might have a volunteer write one document and then another staff member write a different document, which is fine because that's what the resources need us to do. But what can sometimes happen if the messages and the stories that you're telling can have different messages, which then presents challenges for the people in the community that you're trying to share your stories with, because they will then start to get confused about who you actually are. The case for support is an explanation as to why people should be actually investing in your organisation. It's an opportunity for you to tell a story, and it allows you to paint the picture for your organisation. It really there's a few variations on a case for support. Some people just choose to have a simple one-pager document or a more detailed prospectus that's designed and presented more professionally. I like to look at it as 2 options. There's an internal case, which is, I would suggest, usually 5 to 10 pages, depending on your organisation size. And this is a document that's used internally, so it's usually only a Word document. It doesn't have to look too pretty and fancy, and it just has all the content in there that guides all of your other documentations in your organisation. And it's got more, we're going to go through some more detail about what's in that internal case in a moment. And then I also think about your external case. So this is how are you then presenting what's in your internal case to the external community. So how are you sharing that? Some of these things you're already doing, so you already have probably a website or your Facebook page or a newsletter. All of these things are actually external case for supports because it's how you're sharing your story with the outside world. And that's why it's important to have that internal case as the guide to make sure you're always sending out that same messages. That makes your work a whole lot easier in the long run. And if we're working in small organisations, which I think most of us here today are, we want to be using our time most effectively as possible. So here are some of the reasons why you need a case for support. As it says, it's the heart of your fundraising program next to your strategy. So we're going to talk about a fundraising strategy in a moment. But the case for support, and don't be feeling too sad at the moment if you don't have one, because I've worked with many organisations and quite large organisations as well that don't have this document. So I always put it as the first thing that people should have, because if one thing it does, it actually is a great process to go through in terms of documenting it. Most of the information that you need to put in there, you already have. It'll either be in your founder or your CEO's mind, or it'll be in documents, one here, one there, a little bit over there. If you've written grants before, it'll probably, some of the answers are in grant applications that you've written. So it's important to have a look at all of those things and just centralise it into one key document. It's an opportunity for you to engage with your donors. It motivates your potential supporters. Earlier in the day, I spoke about inspiring your supporters. So it's really hard to inspire them if we're not being clear in our message and what we're trying to say. And it helps people in the community also understand how your organisation is different to another charity. And as much as I love the non-profit sector since I've been in it for the past decade or so, because we are such sharing and caring people and willing to share our learnings and our challenges. And I was in advertising and marketing before that, and that was completely the opposite. It was very cutthroat, and you would often be shot if you were talking to someone from another agency. So I have always embraced that part of the charitable sector, but I think what's important for us to remember is it's still competitive. There's still competition. It's not as harsh, but it's still out there. But it doesn't mean that you have to, what we want to do collectively is make the pie bigger, obviously, but there's still only certain elements of the pie that are going to be available. So what that case for support document does, it helps you think about how you can distinguish yourself differently from another charity that may be in a similar space. As I talked about earlier, it brings consistency to the work that you're doing. And if you're definitely in the space of writing a grant program, and if you were in Natalie's session earlier today, she had some fabulous tips in there about grant writing. But if you can put together a case for support, then I do that sort of work a lot for charities, where I'll help them put together a case for support that then they use to go on and use that to write lots of grant applications as a basis. Okay, so I'm going to go through now some of the key components for a case for support. I do believe that the slides are going to be sent out as well, so don't worry if you don't get it all written down. The first section I would have in a case for support, is the overview. So this really just provides a brief description of your organisation and what you do, and make sure you can be clear and succinct. If possible, I try not to do more than 100 words in that. 150 words in that overview. Then the next section, you want to talk about what's driving your charity. So this is what usually connects people to your cause. So what's your mission, what's your vision, your values, or whatever similar words or phrases your organisation might use. Some people have a guiding principles, or a mission statement, or there's a whole range of different things. But what are some of those key aspects to your organisation that help guide your work, and often people will resonate with them and it motivates them to support you? Then it's always important to have a history section, and this is also key. Even if you're a younger organisation, you might only be 3 or 4 years old, it's still important to have a history. And to start to build that history. So the history for a younger organisation may come because when you look at how the organisation was actually established, you might go into a bit of detail about that. Obviously, for an older organisation, you can talk about that history. The reason talking about the history of the organisation is good is because it builds credibility, and it demonstrates your long-term sustainability if you've been around here for a while. And if you're a short-term not a short term, if you've not been around as long, we don't want to be short term organisations obviously, if you've not been around for as long, it is an opportunity to demonstrate the thinking and the forethought that has gone into doing what you're doing, and that's really important as well. People want to know that you're not just by a fly by the seat of your pants organisation if you're just new. Then I would always include the objectives of your organisation. So this is talking a little bit more in detail about what your organisation's vision is and the future direction, and it can detail your organisation's purpose. Then it's always good to have a section on the governance. So governance will talk about your board members or your trustees, your senior management, and I often try and do a very brief bio on each of those, and sometimes that may actually be as an appendix to the case for support document. And so when I say very brief, I usually say, maybe 2 or 3 sentences on each person. Just a bit about their experience and their qualifications that are relevant. Then the next part is the problem. So the problem and the solution are the next 2 sections that I'll talk about, and these actually will take up the bulk of your case for support. So this is the problem areas where you start talking about what issue is it that your organisation has addressed. Don't tell me what you're doing yet. I don't want to know that. I want to know what's the issue, what's the need, why are you doing what you do. So this is where you would get some you would get some facts and figures from community reports or from government or any information that you have that proves there's a need to do what you do in the community. Then, as mentioned, you go into your solution. So what programs and services do you deliver, and activities? So often for some organisations, if you do a multitude of programs and services, you might want to have a mini case for support for each of those other little programs and services where you'd go into that a bit more detail. But in your organisational case, you're just talking about it at a broader level, unless you're just doing one main thing. How are your activities actually addressing the issue? So don't just tell me what you're doing, telling me what you're doing and how do you think that that's actually making a difference and the reasons you've chosen to do those activities in that space. And then I want you to talk about the beneficiaries. So who does your organisation exist for? So I know Natalie spoke in her session earlier today about don't just, you can't sort of just talk about, oh, we're here for everybody in the community. That may be so. The whole community may benefit from the work that you do, but you want to be a little bit more specific. Where you can, as I say up there, geographical details, if it's a particular region, genders, if that's an area, age, groups, if there's certain ethnicities that you might be supporting, or someone with disability or mental health, whatever it is, put some of that information in there. And you can also have primary and secondary beneficiaries. So for that, what I mean is there might be a health organisation that's working with children. So the primary beneficiaries would be the children, but the secondary beneficiaries would obviously quite closely be the family members and the parents, because anything that you can do to support the children is obviously going to help the parents make their life easier as well. Or conversely, if you're an organisation that supports carers, so your primary beneficiary are the carers, and the secondary beneficiaries may be the actual people with the illness or the condition, because if their carers are feeling healthier and more supported, then they're going to benefit from that as well. And then the other part then you talk about is your impact. So what actually are you expecting to happen from all of the work that you're doing? So what benefits will you anticipate? And I will always try and include short-term and long-term benefits, and the outcomes. So be broad in terms of talking about what overall outcomes you like to achieve, but also then be quite specific. And again, if you've got a few different programs, maybe it's worthwhile doing a mini case for some of those specific programs where you can go into the detail of those outcomes a little bit more. And then there's the evaluation. How will you prove what you're doing is actually working? And this is key, because if you can't answer this question and you haven't thought about it, then if you're going into the area of philanthropic funding, you'll struggle, because philanthropic funders will always ask this question. Government 100% will always ask this question. Government, interestingly though, they're changing a little bit now, but most government funding is usually around outputs, not outcome, which is kind of interesting. So they will measure numbers on how many people are going through your program, or these sorts of things, which that tells us only part of the story. We know in the work that we do, impact is actually what matters. So you could have 100 people go through a program in one charity A, and charity B, only 40 people go through the program, but these 40 people actually have made life changes, after the programs, and go on to change their life completely, whereas the 100 people in here, maybe only that happens to 20 of them, because it's a different sort of a program. So while if you just looked at the numbers, this charity would actually be seen to be doing better work in the community. So that's why it's important that we talk about outputs in terms of numbers, but also outcome in terms of the measures and things that you'll be doing in that space, the social impact that you'll be having. So it's important to try and think about the ways that you'll be able to measure those things in your organisation. And then also there will be a financial overview in your document where you have a bit of a forecast budget for your organisation or your project. And I try and itemise those costs. And I also try and forecast the income on where we think that might all go. And that can be really high level at this point in time as well, especially if you haven't done a fundraising strategy for that thing. Okay, so a few last key tips for the case for support before we move on to the fundraising strategy is that some key tips is that it's really best to have one person to write this document. It comes back to that consistency thing that I was talking about earlier. Having a committee write anything is tedious, and I experienced that from time to time working with clients. Sometimes, often more than one person needs to approve something, but working on a committee and it doesn't have to be a formal committee, but just having a group of people try and write one thing is really, really challenging. So having one person that takes ownership of it is the best way to go. Be concise and clear. I was in Frank Chamberlain's session earlier, which was about email writing specifically, but he talked about, being succinct in our writing, and it's important we do that in all sorts of writing as well. Don't say in 500 words what you could have said in 300. My message to myself is usually don't say in 1,000 words what you could have said in 100, because that's usually the way I like to go with things, little chatterbox. In terms of language, make sure you use persuasive language where possible, present tense as well, and use emotive words. Using emotive words is a form of persuasive writing, and it helps engage our readers and engage people that we're talking to, which is what we want to do. Avoid jargon and acronyms. So these might be things that you guys are really familiar with in your organisations, but people in the outside world may be less familiar with. I remember, and I talked a little bit this morning about a rescue helicopter service, and I've got another story for you now about that as well. But when I was working at the rescue helicopter service, this is a very interesting use of terminology around, and a good example for talking about not using jargon. So we were aeromedical rescue helicopter service that saved thousands of lives every year. And our media and PR comms team used to talk about, get the stories from the doctors, and they would then write the stories up and share them with the community. And they used to talk about something called intubating the patient. And I had no idea what intubating a patient meant. And every time I read it, I was just like, that's weird, I don't know what that is. I feel like maybe because I work here, I'm supposed to know what that is, but I don't know. So I kind of let it go for a little while. And then after a while, I actually asked one of our doctors what intubating the patient was. And it actually means to put someone on life support, which for me, that was like a wall moment, because telling me you're intubating me has no emotional connection for me whatsoever. But if you tell me that you put someone, that you pulled a truck driver out of a truck and intubated him on the side of the road, or you put him on life support on the side of the road, I know which one impacts me more greatly. And it's not intubating, because I didn't know what intubating even was. So that was where we started realising internally we were using language that was jargon, which is language that's really common for us, but not going to be helpful outside for our supporters. So just try and avoid using those words. And like I said earlier, it's all about your outcomes. So where you really need to put your emphasis on is what's your social outcomes for your organisations. What is the difference you're really making in the community? And I've got a list of emotive words available. I mentioned earlier I've got a few resources. So I don't have that one up on my website at the moment, but if you go to my website and you send an email, or if you come and see me afterwards and give me your email address, I've got this one pager that's just a list of emotive words. But to be honest, you can probably just Google emotive words lists and get them, and just from time to time check over it. And when you're trying to do some fundraising writing, it's really good to make sure you're including some of those words in your language. Okay, that was a big first tool, wasn't it? The second tool is fundraising strategy. So the fundraising strategy is really important, and it takes time, and it's important that we allow the space to do that. I'm definitely not allowing the space to talk about a strategy in this session because it's only one of 5 tools. I actually spoke at the Fundraising International Conference last week about strategy, just only about strategy for 1 whole hour, and I'm about to knock this off in 10 minutes. So it is a little bit more detailed than what we're going to go through now, but hopefully this will give you a bit of a broad understanding. What's important in fundraising strategy, I think, is to invite stakeholders involvement from different stakeholders. So that could be your board, it could be other team members, or even some key volunteers or key donors, just to get their inputs into what they think's worked in the past and what ideas they may have for the future. Again, it's not about getting everyone involved to write the document, but just getting that buy-in and that feedback at an early stage. Sometimes an external objective person is a great option for writing a strategy because they can have the space to do that, and they can also help pull it all together for you. Not all fundraising strategies, however, will be exactly the same. So I'm going to go through a list of 10 key fundraising strategy components now, but obviously you might adjust them to suit your own organisations. So the first one is an introduction. So this would have your purpose and your key proposition, which you would have pulled out from your case for support. So your key proposition would be part of that, the organisational overview that we talked about. Then you'd have your background, which would include your mission and your values and your organisational objectives as well, which again, some of this information, if you've already done your case for support, you can see, just pull it straight across into this document. Then you do a fundraising review. So this looks at, it's a bit of a snapshot of the last couple of years of your organisation. I like to use charts where possible, maybe some pie charts to show people where some fundraising income has come from. It might be from trusts and foundations, you might have business supporters. If you can get your finance people to help you break that down a little bit, it's really good to have a look at where the money's coming from. So, because when we understand where things have been coming from in the past, we have a better idea of how we can build on that in the future. The other thing I also like to do is a SWOT analysis as well. And so as part of that fundraising review, I think it's really important to try and get the buy-in, like I said, from other stakeholders at that point. Then the next part I do is called the funding sources. So where are you going to get your money from in an overall sense? So is it going to be government? Is it going to be from paid services, like fee for services, or you might have an op shop or some other social enterprise, or it might be from philanthropic sources. So in this morning session, I had a pie chart up there from a Coded Capital giving report, which broke down all the income for charities in Australia, and government and self-services and government and services were the 2 biggest ones, and philanthropy was about 8 to 10%. But it's important. And then if you go into, philanthropic funding sources, who in the philanthropic world? So is it going to be individuals or is it going to be businesses? Where exactly do you think you're going to get your money from? Because not all funding sources are appropriate for every organisation. Not everyone wants to have money from government, or maybe they want to have money from government, but only local government. They don't want to have state or federal government money. So these are the things that you need to think about in a broad sense. Then I would have a section around your tools and assumptions. So what things do you need, or what things are imperative for you to have successful implementation of your plan? So this might be things like, such as a case for support. You actually might, if you're doing your strategy and you haven't got a case for support, you might put that in there as one of your tools. You might need a donor database or something as well. In terms of assumptions, it could be that you've got a fundraising committee that has been really active, so you've developed a plan with the assumption that that fundraising committee is going to continue to be active. So I'd always write that in there, because that's a really good thing to do, because then what happens at the end of the 12 months, if you haven't achieved some of your outcomes, and part of the reason is because the fundraising committee fell over in the middle of the year for whatever reason, then you've at least got something to talk about in that regards. And it's just setting up for success. Then the sixth part I talk about is an overarching approach. So this is, what's your big picture strategy for your organisation in terms of fundraising for the next couple of years? So is it to grow your fundraising? And you all might say, of course it's to grow our fundraising. Whoever says we don't want to grow our fundraising? But sometimes it might be about stabilising your income as well. Or sometimes it could be about building your awareness. So there's a book that I have talked about before when I talk about strategies by Mel Warwick. And I think it's called the Fundraising... I should have written this down, sorry. It's by Mel Warwick, and it's called 5 Strategies for Fundraising Success, I think, or something of that effect, to that effect. And he talks about 5 key strategies, stabilising growth. His strategy is under the word acronym GIVE. So it's growth, something else that I can't remember, visibility, something else that I can't remember, and stability is the end. So that's not bad. 3 out of 5 I remembered off the top of my head. That's not working properly today. But if you've got questions, again, come and see me at the end and give me an email, and I'll shoot you an email by the end of the week to tell you exactly what that book is. But that's a really good book, because he goes into a lot of detail, and he says the best thing to do is to try not to do everything all at once. So pick 1 or 2 of those main key strategies and focus on that. And then your fundraising activities and programs that you choose to do will actually connect with that. So if your plan for the next few years is all about visibility, that doesn't mean you're not going to do any grant writing, but what it means is you just need to remember that writing to grant funders is not going to improve your visibility. You know, you probably need to have some events and things like that in there, because they're the activities that will actually help with your visibility. So it's a really good high-level picture at how you're going to plan your things. Fundraising objectives is the next section. So I'd usually have 3 to 5 of them, and I'd make them a little bit broad at this stage. And the reason I say I make them broad is because when you do your programs and your activities, then I'd have more specific objectives that come under each of those. And your programs and activities would come next, and this is where the bulk of your strategy would be. Normally for me, each of my program or fundraising activities is about half a page. And it's just usually some text around what we're actually doing, what we plan to do, and a few of the key tasks that we want to do. So not every activity needs its own strategy or plan, which you might write a bit of a operational plan for later on, but you can at least just do a third to a half of a page in your actual strategy about each of the activities that you're planning to do. And then your budget and your resources. This talks about both your money and your people as well. That's really important. And then the key to it all is an activity calendar. So I like to just do on one page a 12-month calendar. That's just month by month, where I sort of just plot out all the different activities and when they'll be happening, or where the bulk of the work will be happening, just so then you can see how it's going to look across the year. There'll be busy times, and maybe you can shift some things to a less busy time. So that's the 10-minute fundraising strategy class. That was very quick, but happy to talk to anyone if you've got any more questions afterwards. The third tool that I think is really important is called the constituency model. And this is in Hank Rosso's book, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, which is a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous fundraising book. It's a bit like a textbook though, so there's a lot of information in there. But in his book, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, he brings up this idea of the constituency model. So what a constituency model is, it's really just about identifying your interested parties. So who are the people that are interested in your organisation. So identifying the constituency of your organisation or those interested parties is at the heart of successful fundraising, because if you don't know who these people are, how can you actually achieve any success with your fundraising? And the more we know, the more effective we can be. So this is an example of the constituency model. And what you would do with this is if you were to do your own, you would, can you see it? So if you were to do your own, he's got 5 circles. And as an example, what he says is, the closer to the centre of the circle or the target that a supporter or a constituent is, the more engaged they are in your organisation. So his suggestion is, most likely, if you're a highly functioning organisation, your board members and your management and your major donors will probably sit in this middle space. Then in the next outer circle, you've got your general donors, employees, volunteers, and your beneficiaries. Your former board members, former beneficiaries, and any lapsed donors would be here. Then you'd have your interested parties. So depending on your organisation, you'd have other people sitting out here. And then the actual organisation's universe is this last circle. So that kind of all seems a little bit airy-fairy at the moment. But what the point of this is if you drew up your own constituency model and didn't use these, but populated it with your own people, this is a way for you to start thinking about who's actually interested in your organisation. So if you were, let's just say, an environmental organisation that worked in Victoria, the first point is that your organisation's universe is probably people living in Victoria. Because if you're benefiting Victoria, most likely the most people that are interested are going to be living in Victoria as well. So you would put people living in Victoria as this outside universe one. Your organisation, you may not have a super engaged board, so you'll be like, no, our board's probably in this second level, but you might have very engaged major donors, and maybe you have another key group of volunteers that help plant trees every weekend or something, and they're called the tree planting group. That's a very innovative name for our volunteer group. And you would put them in that middle circle as well there. So then you would just populate all of this. And what it allows you to do is just think of all the different types of people that are engaged and around in your organisation, and then it helps you think about that better so you can tailor your communications to that group more effectively. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay, then the fourth tool is around donor stewardship and a stewardship plan. So donor stewardship, as it says there, is a donor engagement cycle, and I know that this is going to spin, so I'm not going to look at it, because before it made me dizzy when I looked at it. Like I said, it's not the best slide for someone suffering from vertigo. So I did show this slide this morning. It talks about donor engagement having 5 key aspects, and cultivate, thank, and steward are all to do with the engagement of our donors. I'm just moving through this only because I know some of you were here this morning. But getting to know, cultivate is basically what happens before someone makes a donation, and steward is what happens after they've made a donation. But effectively, it all comes down to donor engagement and what activities you're going to do to support them, to keep them connected and engaged with your organisation. So effective donor stewardship will build your donor loyalty, which reduces our costs and builds our efficiencies. It's an opportunity for you to involve your donors and tell donors how you've spent their money and keep them updated. And of course, you need to ask them again, even after they've donated, and saying thank you. I've just got this little video now of a board member in an organisation, or no, director, sorry, in an organisation in America. But he's talking about stewardship. And while our fundraising and charitable sector in Australia is a little bit different to how it is in the US, one thing we can always learn from the US is around their stewardship, because they are brilliant at stewarding.
Is not simply an afterthought. Stewardship is one of the key components of philanthropy. Years ago, people used to make gifts simply because it was a nice thing to do and they wanted to help out. Modern donors tend to look at philanthropy like they are investing in some other stock or commodity. They want to see impact. They want to make sure that the money is used exactly as they specified in their gift arrangements or why they made the gift. And it is the board's responsibility to make sure that happens. And stewardship is not simply a thank you letter from the president or a dean or whoever happens to be involved. It is an ongoing relationship to make sure the donor feels and understands the impact of his or her gift long term. Oftentimes, we have a gift come in, we do the appropriate acknowledgement, but 6 months or a year later, remembering that donor and continuing that stewardship is critically important. Donors often ask, or board members often ask, who are our best prospects for our next $1 million gift? Actually, the best prospect is the person who made a $500,000 gift a few years ago, has been stewarded well, feels really good about that relationship, and is confident that the money will be used however they choose to invest it with us in the future. And usually the parts of stewardship that are unexpected and unsolicited are the most important part. And one of the things that we actually recommend is that trustees can be a very integral part of that stewardship process. Having a note or a letter or a phone call from a trustee or a board member to an individual who has made a gift says a lot more about the institution often than simply getting a letter from a president. So volunteers can be very, very not only aware of the importance of it, but very engaged in thanking people.
So as you can see, he's talking about stewardship as being important for the long-term success of our fundraising. So stewardship is all about engagement, and it involves asking, communicating, engaging, and then acknowledging. It's really important with our stewardship that we get a little bit creative. So obviously thank you letters and things like that, but what other things can you do from your organisation's perspective to say thank you or to engage people? What other activities? You might have an event, or you might send out some artwork. If you're an organisation that works with young people, you might be able to get some kids to, to draw or paint or do some words of thanks that you can then save up all that artwork and use that to give out to people as a thank you. Different ways of engaging people is really important. And it's important to plan. So don't try not to have the stewardship as an afterthought. It needs to be really part of an integral part of your business. So on that note, this is an example of what I would do for a very basic donor stewardship plan. As you can see, and like I said, this is quite a basic one, but it's the easiest one to put on a presentation. But I have used one exactly the same as this for, or not very similar to this, for organisations that are just starting out. So if you don't have a stewardship plan, a very basic one is better than no plan as well. What I've done though is basically I break down the donation amounts up across the top here. So for this organisation, their first level was up to $100 or up to $99. Then 100 to 250, 250 to 1,000, and then anything over 1,000. So for this organisation, they didn't get that many over 1,000. So for that to be our top bracket was fine. But if your organisation's getting bigger donations, you might make this first one 0 to 250 or something, whatever you want it to be. And then down the side here, we've got all the different activities and things that we do for our donors in terms of engagement. So the first one kind of goes without saying, is a receipt. And as you can see, they're all getting a receipt, which is a very good sign. Then the thank you letter. So the first two are getting thank you letters. They're all getting thank you letters, but the people over $250 and more are actually having those personally hand-signed. So we've got that in there. Phone calls being made. They're getting e-newsletters, a quarterly newsletter in the post. The people up the top end of our scale are getting seasonal updates from our programs. They all get a donor survey. Our $1,000 supporters getting invitations to a chairman's lunch once a year. They all get invitation to our ball, and the top two get a personalised invitation from the CEO or from the board. Again, just that little bit extra touch to make them feel special. Annual report listing as well, that's for the top tier, as long as they've given permission to do that. And then a Christmas card. So our bottom two levels get e-cards and our top two levels get printed Christmas cards. And that's just a bit of an example. You might have more options in here, more activities, but that's just a good way to have a bit of a look at that. And the last thing is the donor database. So this is a really important part, so you can try and track your donors. There's no point doing really great stewardship and then not being able to track how they're going and how you're engaging with them. And to be honest, it's really hard to do good stewardship without a good database, because you can't track how you're communicating with those people. So it's more than, you need more than just a spreadsheet. It's really imperative for building relationships. Long-term investment is important as well. And there are a lot more affordable options nowadays for small charities, which is really good to hear. I know someone asked about this question in the earlier session and said, oh, what free ones are there? There are a couple of free ones, but there are a lot more affordable ones now as well, that you can pay on a per monthly basis or a per user basis, or even some that are based on, dependent on how many contacts you have. So if you've got less than 1,000, a little bit like how MailChimp works. If you've got less than 1,000 or 2,000 contacts, you can use MailChimp for free. So this is not to me, this session now is not for me to tell you about which database is best for your organisation, because there are a few things to consider, but this will just give you some ideas to look what you could look for. And I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm going to go through this a bit quickly. Make sure that they are made for fundraising. I know that's really important. You need them to capture the data that you need though. So if you're an organisation that captures other data as well, like patients or health data, that's all well and good, but fundraising data has specific things that we want to capture. So make sure you're actually getting a fundraising database, not just a CRM system. It's important on the functionality. What does it actually do? Will it segment? How will it report? How does it integrate with other systems like your payment gateway or MailChimp, for instance, or another email program? This is a really key one. What training and support do they offer? And not just to get you started, but ongoingly. Some of them, they say, yes, we do that, and then you find out later, well, they do it, but it's an extra $1,000 a year, which is fine. You just need to have an understanding of those things up front. And then what price? Price is obviously important. I think most people probably have heard about Razor's Edge. Razor's Edge by Blackboard is probably the cream of the crop in terms of this sort of work, but it's got a very hefty price tag to go with it as well. And most organisations, to be honest, don't need such a sophisticated system. An organisation that I worked with that was managing 50,000 donors through a direct mail program that sent out direct mail 4 times a year with a follow-up for each. So 8 mailings a year we did was all run through a Donman system, which is quite an old system, and it's not a cloud-based system. Well, it wasn't when we were using it. I think they've transitioned recently. But so it doesn't have to be the biggest database with the most bells and whistles for it to be effective, is what I'm trying to say. So some keys for a successful donor database. Oh, sorry, the other thing I will just say here on this, what to look for, is if you've found someone has just delved into this area of fundraising database, I would really caution you about being a guinea pig for an organisation that's building a database for the first time. Only because I've known a handful of charities that have done that, and it's just been a lot of hard work. So you're more than welcome, and they might tempt you by saying, oh, you can have it for free, but transitioning to a database or transitioning from one to another is probably one of the biggest tasks that you will ever have to do in a charity, in my experience. It's a bit of a headache, and it goes on for a while. So you want to make sure you're working with someone that actually knows what they're doing in the space, is what I'm trying to say. You don't want to be someone's guinea pig. So some keys to successful donor database: make sure your staff or the volunteers using it are trained. Make sure you have a style or a usage guide for yourself. Any rubbish that you put in is only going to bring you rubbish coming out of the database, so make sure that you are very clear about what needs to go in and what data is tidied up. And look out for making duplicate records, missing any details or spelling errors and things like that. That's it. Any questions? I'm just going to put this up as well while we're waiting for the microphone. Oh, you? No, you don't want my bit.
Vladimir from Global Data.
Yep.
Just my question is towards databases and also what the not-for-profit sector is doing. Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to start to sing now. So what the not-for-profit organisations are doing to combat donor fatigue and also lost donors. Global Data, and this is not a plug for Global Data, just for your knowledge, but we hold over 400 million records on Australian consumers. That's current and also historical. And one of the things we're finding now is that, and we've written articles on it, is that using data pools, which most not-for-profit organisations do, they're tending to, and pardon my French, but they're tending to piss off donors who will donate once, but then all of a sudden through the donor pool are getting 5 or 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 charities ringing them up to say, hey, can you do anything about that? So I'm just wondering, in your presentations for new donors that are coming, or new not-for-profits that are coming on board, is there a section there where they can see what they need to do for data washing and making sure there's no rubbish in and rubbish going on into their CRMs?
Yeah, that makes sense. No, thank you for your question. I have done other presentations before where it goes into a little bit more detail around the database stuff. But often what I do encourage people to do is actually work with their database supplier to get the best information, because most database suppliers, like what you're talking about, have an understanding and have the expertise in that area to know that the work that they're doing and how best to get results. I know in countries like the US, the data pooling has worked really well, but I also know in Australia it's been a bit of a flop, to be honest, and that has ticked a lot of people off. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the comments.
Just one quick question.
This question, it comes under the case for support.
Yes.
And you mentioned about evaluation and how do you measure how successful your project has been. And I just wondered if, I'm always stumped on that.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could just give me some examples of how you can measure it. Like I've sort of suggested perhaps a survey or something, but anything else?
It depends on what your it does depend a little bit on what your organisation does. I'm happy to have a chat with you offline if you want to. It does depend. Surveys are a good thing. It depends what your outcomes are going to be. Obviously, some of the measures should be around numbers, so how many people are doing what you're doing and trying to track the quantitative data, but there does need to be some qualitative data in there as well. So qualitative might be that you're doing surveys, and it might be a survey with people before they do your program, and then 12 months after they're doing the programs and things like that. Unless you're doing something a bit bigger, which is going to cost money, but actually getting, you could partner with a local university or someone like that who might find a student that might actually be able to use your program and do some of their research around as well. But it is a bit tricky depending on your program. But I'm happy to chat with you a bit if you want to. Sorry, I just put that up as well just because I didn't want anyone to miss out. I'm offering a 2-hour free coaching session, so you just have to go to my Facebook page. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bianca. That's fantastic. You did exceptionally well. I mean, that's 2 sessions.